This isn't just a podcast, it's a movement. The Middle Ground Mike is fighting for truth and unity. Subscribe now or support us today. Links are in the notes. Stand with us. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe to Finding the Middle, the newsletter that breaks down what people are actually talking about, not just what the scary headlines say. Go to themiddlegroundmike.com/newsletter and join tons of other listeners getting smarter every week. All right, let's talk a little bit about the public's alarm in America's search for democracy. Searches for authoritarian America, democracy decline, and the No Kings protest have exploded since last week's nationwide marches. They're saying, I believe some people are saying 2,900. No Kings rallies erupted across all 50 states from New York to Kansas City. Citizens are protesting what they see as creeping authoritarianism in Trump's second term. What I wish the public noticed was that this was happening under the Biden administration, and I'm not making a Democrat versus Republican issue. Like some of these things, these tendencies that have really started to take hold, there's always been some whispers of that in government, but it really started with COVID and everybody trying to control the narrative, right? And now it just keeps going. It goes back to what I'm saying. You got to hold your own party accountable because eventually the opposite party is going to be in there and they're going to have the power to do the same thing. So if we're not okay with a Republican doing it to you or a Democrat doing it to you, you probably shouldn't be okay with your own party doing it. The Guardian says they're reporting record-breaking crowd sizes at some anti-Trump rallies. Google Trends have showed a huge spike in Trump emergency powers. A lot of activists are saying this is less about party and more about balance. There's got to be a balance in power. We have to be balanced. Things can't be one way or the other, because it just won't do well. Things go bad, Gen Z and suburban voters drove much of online engagement. And, they're showing a cross ideological fear about institutional delay, though they view what's decaying, why it's decaying, but everybody's noticing it, right? We have to find some kind of way. These institutions are going to be reformed. They're going to be reorganized. It's just we're at that point in our country's time, right? It happens every so many generations, whatever it is, right? So we're in that, they're expecting the continued digital activism on Reddit threads, the TikTok challenges and No King hashtags have surged over 500%. This protest culture has morphed into a bipartisan anxiety about democracy itself. And the search data proves it. This is what the public's looking for. This is what the average everyday American is searching on the internet for. So there is that narrative out there. How are we going to address this narrative? How are we going to fix it? Currently, it's being fueled by the Trump administration, right? But before that, it was being fueled by the Biden administration. It's always going to be fueled by whatever person's in power. I mean, that's just the nature of life, but the question is how do we fix this? Where do we go from here, right? There needs to be some sort of line that the public or even the courts that they cannot cross in terms of some of these crackdowns. It has to be established because obviously there's not enough of establishment to it. The shutdown is still sending shockwaves across political ground in America and to everyday people. Reports are that over 2,500 flights were delayed last week due to controller absences. I mean, you're not getting your money. Why'd you go to work? There's a lot of trends and increased searches for flight cancellation, shutdown, government pay delay, what agencies are closed. All those has surged over 200%. People are looking at this. So if you're a political party, you're going to want to make sure your message is authentic, has facts, don't misconstrue them, because the public is looking. They're trying to figure it out. They're trying to figure out what's going on. So you might want to know what the public's thinking if you're a politician right now. I would hope you do, but we've seen plenty of examples where they don't. Obviously, a lot of people are concerned about the government pay delay. They're concerned about their flights. They're concerned about is the agency they need operating. Well, the partisan blame game just keeps intensifying. Both sides test messaging on who caused the crisis. States like Michigan, Florida, and Texas are showing the sharpest rise in shutdown-related searches. The expect economic data impacts is going to happen. Consumer confidence is definitely going to dip. Spending is going to slow. Investment is going to slow. because people don't have confidence in Washington to be able to figure out how to pay the light bill or pay people that work for them. That's what it's going to come down to. And that's how people are going to feel on both sides of the aisle that are working there. Americans aren't Googling which party is right. They're Googling, when do I get paid? That says everything about where frustration really lies. It's the economy, stupid. Let's talk a little bit about the foreign flashpoints. Israel and Gaza are at peace, but now Hamas seems to be attacking people within its own community, but that is their fight. So far, things seem to be holding between Israel and Hamas and Gaza. So, let's see how that plays out. Um, you know, President Trump's meeting with Vladimir Zelenskyy has dominated a lot of global headlines after reports he urged Ukraine to surrender parts of Donbass to end the war. Hopefully I said that right. It's confirming Trump's private insistence on territorial concessions. I've said, they kind of already consider Crimea there. I mean, toss that out there, see what that is. The searches for Donbass map, Trump's peace plan, and Ukraine surrender are all now trending up over 50%. So, like I said, people are paying attention to this. They want to know about it. Americans are showing renewed interest in US Russia policy. If you check previous episodes I've had on here, I've had several people that have a lot of expertise in this area. I've got another one coming up with Susan Perry. She was an arms control negotiator and she actually negotiated with the Soviets. So that'll be a good take for you guys. There's definitely a tidbit in there that you probably don't realize that Vladimir Putin's using to keep the Russians engaged. Something that I didn't realize he was saying, something that the news doesn't really talk about. He uses World War II as a motivating tool to keep the people rallied. Like, hey, we won World War II. They're using these things. Like he repeats this. Like, you actually look at that is some of what he says. The search traffic for this stuff is the highest since 2022 in the United States. Analysts are now starting to warn that public fatigue over foreign conflicts is shaping 2028's voter mindset. Trump was elected on ending war, so he got an end to the Israel one before people go, hey, guess what? Even a lot of Democrats said he did. So take your temper tantrum somewhere else. But yeah, people are tired of war. They're tired of fighting for things that they don't see as doing anything, right? It just seems pointless. So they're tired of it. Expect a short-term drop in U.S. credibility abroad if the deal appears one-sided. The average American isn't talking about geopolitics. They're asking, why are we still funding this? The trends shows that the sentiment is loud and clear. People are tired of it. I know Trump promised it. We all wanted it a lot faster. He promised it a lot faster, but what I like is he did use diplomacy and, he really did try. We don't know what the complete facts are about the conversations behind the scenes, but he has to figure out a way to end this war. I mean, it's what he ran on. It's one of the things he takes a lot of pride in. And I think a lot of people who have voted for him take pride in that. Was one of the reasons I liked him because of, how he got us out of certain situations his first term. So let's happen. We definitely need to watch the situation in Venezuela with that. He may be ending one, but he's poking the bear on another. Let's hope we can get out of this without escalating any more issues. The tech politics collision, it keeps going faster and it keeps growing. And that's some of our hottest topics on this podcast right now is AI and tech and how it's all mashed together with politics. AI regulation, and it's about the future truth. Searches for AI video generators, deepfake elections, and AI laws 2025 have exploded as campaigns are eyeing new tools. People are trying to figure out if what they're seeing is real versus what isn't real, right? AI usage in classrooms, journalism. I use AI to make thumbnails. It's just growing. I think for what I do, I don't see too much of an issue because it's mainly just thumbnails and certain searches, because when you use search engine, technically that's AI to me, but you know, exploding topics shows AI agents, voice cloning as top rising queries. So people are trying to imitate voices, right? To make it sound like it's really that person. There's a concern about a deep fake misinformation are the highest in swing states like Michigan and Arizona. Congress they're actually, this seems to be something they're working together on. Bipartisan pressure people are putting on in Congress to regulate the election related AI tools, which, yes, you should. You should not be able to really use AI to promote elections if you're politicians. Nope. And even with stuff like mine, right? Election, if it's related to an election per se, there might need to be some guidelines to make sure things aren't crazy. You know, um, Another trending topic among the American public when it relates to these elections and with, AI tools and things like that, you know, and why it relates to it is they're trying to figure out how can I tell if the video is fake? So could we be saying like a permanent watermark that you can't take off? Could be like ingrained in the video? I don't know, but you can bet they're going to be doing something about it because they're facing pressure from both sides. The public on both sides of the aisle is really wanting some sort of structure for this to protect them and to protect their jobs down the road. Technology isn't left or right. Check out our episode with Jacob Ward, former NBC Al Jazeera reporter, just came out the other day. Some great information, I learned especially about, ChatGPT got sued for telling someone how to kill themselves, and I believe the young man did. Um, you know, but like I said, technology isn't left or right. It's fast, and the regulation seems to move slow. The middle ground here to me is education before legislation. That's just kind of where I stand on that one. But the election fever, right? What are people looking up? What are they searching? What's really driving the crowd for the 2028 election cycle? We got a couple of years, right? But this is 2026 is going to be a precursor to what could be forming 2028. Register to vote, where to vote early, and independent candidates. That one alone for 2020, independent candidates for 2028 is up over 300% in searches. So independent people are growing. That voice is growing. Eventually, it's going to drown out the extremes on the left and the right. It's going to. People can say, no, I mean, obviously, they're growing discontent with the way things are just based on that, right? You know, People are looking up things like, that are politically related to, campaign ideas is how are you going to fix the healthcare cost? I've talked a lot about that. We need to figure out why we need subsidies in the first place to even afford healthcare. We need to fix that problem. They're still looking up the border security, birth control rights. Those three are the top concerns among voters when you look up the statistics and the trends in which voters are looking up what issues. So, healthcare, border security, birth control rights, those seem to be where the voters are at right now. I'm sure the economy will pop on there between now and then. Like I said, it's the economy, stupid. But after some federal proposals posted, People Magazine said they seen a spike in birth control searches. Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia has shown again heavy interest in battleground barometers. We're a purple state. Georgia and Pennsylvania can be too. Expect the next wave of the focus on the economy and candidate trustworthiness. It's going to be for both midterms 2026 and 2028. The general elections. Search engines are the new focus groups because they reveal the questions campaigns should be answering and not dodging. Because this is what the average people are looking up. It's what's trending. So a lot of people are looking up, right? So that's how you know where to look. Where are people's minds at? How are they viewing the problems? How are they viewing the answers that politicians are giving? How are they viewing the impact of those items? It's, the fourth estate fights back. The press freedom is still in question. But, dozens of journalists walked out of the Pentagon press corps, citing new restrictions by Defense Secretary Peter Hegseth. AP confirms major news outlets suspended defense coverage after credential restrictions have been tightened. People are looking up why journalists are being banned, where we're going at with press freedom in 2025. I know this says there could be consequences if they do press releases or they cover things that the Pentagon doesn't give the okay. Yeah, that's not okay for the Pentagon to do. I mean, it's supposed to be the opposite. As long as they're not dropping war plans, I mean, it's fair game. That's how it's always been. That's how they've always kept them honest, even with bias. Legal scholars are warning this could escalate into a First Amendment showdown, which I honestly think legacy media would win. I mean, let's be fair. If there was something shady going on in there, wouldn't you want somebody to cover it and expose it? To me, that seems more important. You know, that's how we have accountability. The Guardian analysts are suggesting public trust in the media rises when journalists resist control. Well, yeah, because they start, they see things, right? I mean, yeah, it's a political ploy, yes, but it's also they're going, okay, hey, there's a line that seems to be being crossed here. And what is it? They're starting to wonder what line is being crossed here. And they start looking at these journalists and seeing it. And sorry, saying you can't cover if we don't give the okay. And if you do, you could be kicked out of the press corps here. What? What are you, three? Come on. Americans are starting to really look up, can journalists be banned? Because they sense the line between security and censorship is really starting to blur and they want to know where it's going. Things for you guys to really watch this week and that we'll be covering, we'll be making social media posts. The shutdown negotiations. Could they reach a breaking point this week? Monitor flight and pay related trends. Protest momentum may shift from the streets to the state legislatures, which it already has to some degree. Look up the young Republican situation. That'll give you an idea along with the No Kings protest. I would advise looking those two up if you want to see where those impacts really are. We're going to hopefully see some Zelenskyy, Trump, Putin updates. There's been a lot of negotiations. The AI regulation hearings are coming down this week. It could surface a lot of deepfake legislation. I'm telling you, it is out there. I did an episode on Adam Swart from Crowdsource, the largest paid protesting company in the world. Look that episode up. It'll be it'll be the links down here. I'll put that on there for you guys to maybe look at, some of these. I don't think the vast majority of No Kings protests were paid, but a lot of these things are paid and funded to skew how you view things. And if you don't believe me, look up the man that I've got on this show that says that is true. It is true. A lot of these things do get paid. Billionaires do pay money for these crowds to sway your opinion. It is an actual industry. It's an industry. People are going crazy about, like I said earlier, independent candidates in 2028 and how to volunteer. It's really starting to fuel people's hearts and just burning them, right? So, like I said, independent affiliation is now, I believe, over 40% of the voter base now. The median storm fury may expand into congressional hearings. Watch the press pool, reinstatement chatter, right? And that's it for this week, Finding the Middle Monday edition. Everything you heard here and some clips will be in the newsletter, straight from what the public is actually searching and not pundit panels. Stay informed, stay balanced, and keep pushing for the truths and the extremes. Subscribe now to middlegroundmike.com/newsletter for trend reports, Michigan local editions, and early access and exclusive guest breakdowns. And you're going to hear a lot of good commentary. And we got a lot of great things coming up. We got some huge interviews coming up. So really appreciate everything you guys are doing. The show is growing like crazy. Definitely check out our segment section on YouTube now. In our segment section on YouTube, we take a lot of the interviews and we break them down up in the 4 or 5 minute clips. And, it's a really good way for you to check out certain topics and see how you might like the show without having to watch that full long thing. Maybe you can dial in a little bit more. It also connects you to some of the shorts. It gives you the links to the podcast episode as well as the full YouTube video in it. And it always has the date release of that full episode on there as well. So check that out. All right, everybody. Hopefully you have a good Monday. Talk to you later.